Well, we're joined now by Alex Capri, is senior lecturer at the NUS Business School. Good morning, Alex. Good to see you today on the show. Let's start by, talking about what we're seeing following the ASEAN and APEC summits, and of course that very important meeting between President Trump and the Chinese leader Xi Jinping. So I'm wondering, how would you describe China-US ties at the moment? I mean, there seem to be two pictures. On the one hand, there's an easing of tensions, military-to-military communication has been restored, and so forth. On the other hand, we have Pete Hegseth going around Asia, in the footsteps of Donald Trump, signing all these, if you like, upgraded military deals to protect against a rising China.
Well, this is clearly the paradox that we're in today, where we have nations looking for ways to reduce supply chain disruptions. As your piece mentioned in the intro, there's great concern about tariffs still. And there are efforts underway to try and come up with, ways to work together amongst nations. At the same time, as you mentioned, the great power rivalry between the United States and China in particular is a systemic, existential issue. And that's not going away. So the world is sort of struggling with, it's grappling with this paradox, right? How do we look for ways to increase trade and investment, while at the same time trying to diffuse things like export controls and, of course, as you mentioned, the military side of things?
Yeah, just zooming in on U.S.-China trade war truce, Alex, how durable do you expect it to be? And the fact that Beijing appears to have secured some concessions from Washington, does that suggest to you something about China's growing ability to deal with the U.S. on a more equal footing?
Absolutely. So China has the rare earths, critical minerals choke point, if you will, while the U.S. continues to have the chip, right? The chip war, the value chain choke points around things like manufacturing equipment, et cetera. Those are two indispensable elements of the global supply chain. And both Beijing and Washington have realized that if those elements are weaponized too much, there's going to be a lot of collateral damage. At the same time, I think this is a buying time kind of strategy, particularly for China. China has doubled down on its efforts to create its own indigenous industry across all strategic sectors. Of course, we're seeing the reshoring happening around rare earths and critical minerals back to the United States, Australia, et cetera. So I do think that this truce, if you will, or this de-escalation that we're seeing, it's a temporary thing. It's a smaller element in a much larger existential competition that's going to continue.
I hear you, Alex. I want to ask you a bit more, about who holds the edge right now. I mean, I've come across all the reports, all the analysis, but I just want to take us very quickly back to the pictures, the visuals that came from that meeting in South Korea, in Busan. Donald Trump was first at the menu. Donald Trump was waiting to greet President Xi Jinping at that podium, or whatever you want to call it, the stage. And at the end of the meeting, he was the one who apparently saw off Xi Jinping as his car came around. I mean, do those pictures tell a story, of their own, on their own as well, you think?
I think so, Arnold. I think the long game that China is playing is clearly visible here, and I think that that President Xi has come to understand that Trump has been consistently backing off, right, carving out exceptions to tariffs. And that this is an ongoing kind of process, and so China is playing the long game, and I think they've really begun to grasp the power that they have, particularly when it comes to rare earths, right? So The supply chain weaponization, unfortunately, is part of the landscape that all companies are going to have to learn to live with and to scenario map around, right? So the rare earths is a major weapon in Beijing's arsenal right now, and we can clearly see that through these discussions between the Americans and the Chinese.
Alex, I want to quickly go to the APEC summit that just took place over the weekend, issuing a joint statement, the leaders that was heavy on trade, supply chains, and AI inclusion, but did not mention multilateralism, did not talk about the World Trade Organization, nor AI regulation. I understand these are probably, two different questions, but I mean, what's that telling us about how these leaders, view the world and how it's evolving in terms of trade, in terms of other issues like strategic concerns as well?
I think there's an acknowledgement across the board that the world is undergoing this inflection point where minilateralism and bilateralism has replaced multilateralism when it comes to strategic national interests. And so what we see at the APEC summit is China looking to assert itself on the AI issue. Again, the United States has essentially removed itself from the equation when it comes to playing global chief architect, if you will, around multilateral institutions. When it comes to even being the world's policeman, which was all part of the U.S. role in this post-World War II Bretton Woods system. That system has come to an end. So I think what we're seeing out of APEC is, again, we're seeing great power competition, but in this case, we're seeing China asserting itself, promoting itself as a safe, consistent alternative to the Americans when it comes to trade, when it comes to, putting together some kind of rules framework around AI, which, of course, the United States has rejected, right? So I think this is the narrative that we'll continue to see going forward.
Okay. And Alex, we heard President Trump calling this trip a success. But when we just go back to nearly a decade ago, after walking away from the TPP to now, where we saw his new wave of Asian and ASEAN diplomacy, do you see this as a sign that perhaps Mr. Trump is recognizing the value of regional cooperation, or is it still largely opportunistic deal-making?
It's the latter. It's a success from a transactionalist approach, in the eyes of Mr. Trump and the administration. It's about isolating, countries one at a time, if possible. Bending those countries to the Trump 2.0 will, if you will. So I think in that regard, Mr. Trump would regard these at least these very public appearances and announcements around these kinds of meetings as, from a transactional standpoint, successful.
Okay, so how might the outcomes of this trip shape his other trade negotiations going forward, say with India or Canada? Would you say it strengthens his negotiating hand?
Well, look, that's a good question, right? Again, we have to take everything on a case-by-case basis. However, what we saw, for example, with the Canadian Prime Minister Carney, publicly apologizing for an offensive television political ad that was run. I think it was one of the provinces, or out of Montreal, in a political campaign. So you are seeing individual country leaders very publicly kissing the ring, if you will, and towing the line. So I think from that regard, it would seem that isolating countries one by one through bilateral negotiations, which is the modus operandi of the Trump administration, it appears to be working, at least on the surface.
Okay, Alex, so we'll have to leave it there for now, but thank you very much for your insight this morning. Alex Capri, Senior Lecturer at the NUS Business School.